Imagine for a second that you're sitting in just deadlocked bumper-to-bumper traffic.
Yeah, the absolute worst.
Right. You've got nowhere to go. You're completely boxed in on all sides by metal and asphalt. And then in your rearview mirror, you see the flashing red lights of an ambulance.
Man, that is a helpless feeling.
It really is. You can hear the siren wailing, and it's getting closer, but it's physically trapped, like it's desperately trying to navigate through the gridlock, but the cars just can't part fast enough.
Because there's literally nowhere for them to go.
Exactly. When it comes to medical emergencies, the ground is, well, it's our biggest enemy.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it.
But what if we just, stopped using the ground entirely?
Today, we are looking at a masterclass in what economists call institutional leapfrogging. Specifically, we're doing a deep dive into the Rwanda blueprint.
This is such a fascinating topic.
It really is. We're going to explore how an emerging region just completely bypassed 20th century legacy highway infrastructure to build basically a 21st century decentralized aerial supply chain. Right? They solved this massive logistical nightmare that huge centralized Western bureaucracies are honestly still struggling to fix today.
Yeah, and to do this, we're pulling from a really incredible stack of sources for you today. We've got medical feasibility studies out of India and Malaysia, some rigorous economic evaluations, a few military bioethics papers, and this striking impact report from the Rwanda Biomedical Center.
It's a remarkable data set. I mean,
Yeah.
mostly because it forces us to completely reevaluate how we deliver life-saving care.
Yeah.
But to really grasp why this aerial supply chain is so revolutionary,
Hmm.
we first have to understand why the traditional legacy grid, the one that relies on perfectly paved highways and centralized blood banks, why that's failing us.
Right. And it's not just about the roads.
No, not at all. That failure actually starts at the microscopic level. It's the biological, physical nature of blood itself.
Okay, let's unpack this because I think people, I think they often assume moving blood is like moving a vaccine or maybe a basic medication. Like you just put it in a cooler with some ice packs, load it in a van, you hit the road.
Right, the old beer cooler method.
Exactly. But from what I'm reading in these feasibility studies, the physical biology of blood actively fights against that kind of simple transport.
Oh, it fights it at every single turn. I mean,
Yeah.
whole blood is incredibly sensitive. It requires strict, continuous temperature control. We were talking about a very narrow thermal window.
How narrow are we talking?
Ideally, it has to be kept between 2 to 6 degrees Celsius.
Wow. Okay. That's practically nothing.
Right. And if it gets too warm, even by just a few degrees, its oxygen carrying capacity begins to degrade rapidly. Plus, you introduce a severe risk of bacterial contamination.
Because it's biological material.
Exactly. Blood is basically the perfect nutrient broth for bacteria. So if the temperature rises, those pathogens, they just multiply exponentially.
So it spoils, and then it becomes this massive infection risk to the patient. But, and this is what surprised me, you also can't just pack it in dry ice and freeze it solid for the journey, right?
Absolutely not. No, if blood gets too cold, you trigger a process called hemolysis.
Hemolysis.
Yeah. When blood freezes, these sharp microscopic ice crystals form, and they literally puncture the cell membranes of the red blood cells.
Oh, wow. So they just tear it apart from the inside.
Precisely. And when that blood thaws out, those cells rupture and die. They spill their internal contents, things like potassium and hemoglobin, directly into the plasma.
Which I'm guessing is bad news for the patient.
Very bad. If you transfuse heavily hemolyzed blood into a trauma patient, it causes massive kidney failure. I mean, it is frequently fatal.
Right.
So you're basically walking this incredibly tight thermal tightrope.
It's like trying to deliver a melting ice cream cake across a sprawling city at rush hour, but the stakes are literally life and death.
That's a great analogy, yeah.
And the crazy thing is, even when you have world-class infrastructure, the ground still gets in the way. Like, look at that 2018 disaster simulation they ran in Montreal.
Oh, right, the mass casualty tests.
Yeah, because we traditionally view Montreal's grid as highly robust, right?
Uh-huh.
It's a major, highly developed urban center. But they ran this citywide simulation to test their medical logistics during a crisis, and the results were, well, they were pretty sobering.
To say the least.
Standard road closures and just typical urban traffic jams completely paralyzed the delivery of simulated blood products. The ground infrastructure completely failed the medical requirement.
Which really highlights a fundamental flaw in urban planning when it comes to healthcare. A highway is a shared resource. An ambulance carrying blood has to share the exact same physical space as a delivery truck, a commuter, or a broken down sedan.
Well, let me play devil's advocate here on behalf of anyone listening. If transporting blood from a central hospital to a remote clinic is so vulnerable to traffic, why not just spend the money to build decentralized blood banks everywhere?
All right, just put a fridge in every town.
Yeah. Just put a high-tech medical fridge full of blood in every single rural clinic and bypass the traffic altogether.
I mean, it seems like the most intuitive solution, but the Malaysian economic evaluation in our stack shows exactly why that is a massive financial and medical trap.
Really? How so?
It fundamentally comes down to an inventory management problem. Blood is a highly perishable asset with stochastic or basically entirely unpredictable demand.
Right, because you never know when an accident will happen.
Exactly. You never know exactly when or where a severe car crash or a postpartum hemorrhage is going to occur. So if you distribute your limited blood supply into these tiny remote peripheral clinics, those specific clinics might not see a major trauma for 6 months.
Ah, I see. So the blood just sits in the fridge, hits its 35-day shelf life, and then it just has to be thrown away.
Precisely. You experience catastrophic waste and expiration rates. The Malaysian data proves that peripheral storage is wildly inefficient.
But wait, if you keep all the blood in a massive centralized bank in the city to prevent that waste, because I assume a central hospital uses blood every day, then it can't reach a rural patient in time when an isolated emergency finally does happen.
Exactly. It's an economic and medical catch-22.
Wow. So it's an inventory problem disguised as a transport problem.
That is exactly what it is.
So if building perfectly paved highways to every remote clinic takes billions of dollars and decades of time, and decentralized storage leads to massive waste, you just have to change the rules of the game. You can't just keep trying to pave the dirt road faster.
Right.
And that brings us to Rwanda, because they looked at this impossible logistical puzzle with all these rural clinics separated by mountainous terrain and unpaved roads, and they asked a really radical question, like, what if we just decouple from the ground entirely?
It is the purest definition of thinking outside the grid. In 2016, the government of Rwanda formed a partnership with an automated logistics company called Zipline. And instead of waiting decades for asphalt to be poured through this difficult mountainous terrain, they built a highly centralized hub-and-spoke aerial distribution model using fixed-wing autonomous drones.
And the scale of this in the sources is just staggering. We aren't talking about, a couple of quadcopters flying around a parking lot as a tech demo.
No, not at all.
These autonomous aircraft now service 624 delivery sites across the country. They are launching a delivery every 70 seconds.
Every 70 seconds. And the mechanics of the hub-and-spoke system are brilliant because they solve that Malaysian inventory trap we just talked about.
Right, because the blood isn't sitting in a rural fridge expiring.
Exactly. They keep all the blood centrally located at a few distribution hubs, which guarantees it gets used and rotated properly, eliminating the waste. But when a doctor at a rural clinic has an emergency, they literally just send a WhatsApp message or a text to the hub.
A WhatsApp message? That's wild.
Yeah. And within minutes, the blood is packed, loaded into a fixed-wing drone, and launched from a catapult.
And these aircraft are really moving. Like, the data says a single drone can hold up to 3 kilograms of payload, which in medical terms is about 4 units of blood or over 100 vaccine vials.
That's a lot of life-saving material.
It is. And they fly a 250-kilometer round trip at speeds up to 100 kilometers per hour. Plus, they don't even land at the clinic.
Right, they just drop it.
Yeah, they descend, drop the medical package via this simple biodegradable paper parachute, and immediately return to base. They are reaching patients in 15 to 45 minutes, a journey that could take hours or even days by road during the rainy season.
That sheer speed completely alters the medical landscape.
It really does. And to ground this in reality, there's this human story in the Rwandan Biomedical Center report that just makes this incredibly tangible.
Oh, the story about the mother.
Yeah. Martha Uwatansi. She's a 43-year-old mother from the Kayanza district. She had just given birth and suddenly suffered a soaring fever and severe postpartum hemorrhage.
Which, just for context, is one of the leading causes of maternal mortality globally. It is an intensely time-sensitive emergency. Literally, minutes dictate survival.
Exactly. And her local hospital was a 2.5-hour round trip by road from the nearest regional blood center.
2.5 hours.
Yeah, 2.5 hours she simply did not have. But because of this aerial grid, the doctor sent a request, and the drone delivered 6 units of blood via parachute to the hospital's lawn in under 30 minutes.
Incredible.
She was immediately transfused, and her life was saved.
And Martha's individual story is powerfully reflected in the macro data, too. By centralizing the blood supply at a drone hub, but maintaining that instantaneous delivery, this system reduced blood waste by 67% across the entire network.
Wow. And what about the order fill rates?
They jumped from 70% to 99%, meaning if a doctor asked for blood, they got it almost without fail. But honestly, the most profound statistic from the impact research is the effect on human life.
What did they find?
This drone system reduced in-hospital maternal mortality due to postpartum hemorrhage by 51%.
Wait, cutting maternal mortality in half simply by removing ground traffic from the equation? That is a staggering indictment of our current infrastructure.
It really forces you to pause, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And if you look strictly at maternal mortality caused specifically by blood shortages, like where the patient died simply because the blood wasn't physically there in time, that number was essentially eliminated.
Eliminated.
A 99% reduction.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. They essentially skipped the 20th century development step entirely. Like they went straight from dirt roads to an autonomous aerospace network.
What's fascinating here is the core concept of technological leapfrogging. When an emerging region doesn't have a massive entrenched legacy infrastructure, they aren't bound by its limitations.
Right.
By avoiding the regulatory bloat, the decades of environmental reviews, the construction delays, and the massive infrastructural debt of the West, Rwanda was able to build the world's fastest, most efficient logistics grid practically overnight.
They didn't try to optimize a broken system.
Exactly. They flew right over it.
Yeah, okay, but let me push back a bit because if you're listening, you might be thinking what I was thinking when reading this. It's one thing to successfully launch a drone and have it hit a GPS coordinate, but strapping a bag of incredibly fragile, temperature-sensitive human blood, which we established earlier, is a nightmare to transport to a vibrating high-speed machine raises a massive scientific question.
Does the blood actually survive the trip?
Yeah. If a drone is flying at 100 kilometers per hour under a blazing equatorial sun, how does it not just turn into a flying microwave for the blood?
It is the most critical hurdle of the entire concept, really. And it's where the materials engineering really shines. A study published in PLOS-1, conducted in Malaysia, tested this exact variable.
Oh, they tested the boxes.
Yeah, they looked at different carriage materials to build the drone's payload box out of. They tested aluminium, polypropylene plastic, and expanded polystyrene, or EPS, foam.
Okay, so metal, hard plastic, and foam. I mean, I'd assume metal would be the most secure, right?
You'd think so, for physical protection at least. But thermally, the aluminium and the plastic completely failed.
Really?
Yeah, they act as thermal conductors. They end up absorbing the heat from the drone's motors and the ambient equatorial sun and transferring it directly to the blood bag. But the EPS foam acted as a perfect thermal barrier.
Because foam is mostly air.
Exactly. EPS foam is essentially 98% trapped air, and air is a terrible conductor of heat. Even in a hot, humid equatorial climate, the EPS foam maintained an internal payload temperature of exactly 4.7 degrees Celsius throughout the entire flight.
Oh, wow, which perfectly hits that 2 to 6 degree sweet spot we talked about earlier.
Right on the money.
But what about the physical shaking, like the rotors, the wind turbulence, the sudden G-forces of being launched from a catapult? Doesn't the sheer physical agitation cause that hemolysis you mentioned? Like, does the blood arrive looking like a shaken-up soda?
The medical safety has been extensively validated because of those exact concerns. We actually have double-blinded studies from the Indian Council of Medical Research, or ICMR, as well as data from Japan testing LDH levels.
Okay, for those of us who aren't hematologists, what exactly are LDH levels and why do they matter here?
Good question. LDH stands for lactate dehydrogenase. It's an enzyme found inside red blood cells.
Okay.
If a blood cell is physically damaged or ruptured, say, by intense vibration or G-forces, it leaks LDH into the fluid around it. So by measuring LDH, we can see exactly how much physical trauma the blood endured.
Ah, I see.
And along with LDH, they tested hematocrit, which is the volume of red blood cells, hemoglobin, the oxygen carriers, and platelets, which help the blood clot.
So basically a full stress test of the blood's integrity.
Precisely. And all these studies across India, Japan, and Malaysia prove conclusively that drone transport causes no significant degradation to any of those markers compared to just sitting in a stationary fridge. The blood arrives in pristine, fully transfusible condition.
That is wild. And the ICMR study in India actually raced the drones against ground transport to prove the logistical superiority, didn't they?
They did, yeah. They pitted a medical drone directly against a standard medical transport van. The drone covered a 36-kilometer route in just 8 minutes.
8 minutes?
Yep. And the van, dealing with standard road conditions, took 55 minutes to cover the exact same distance.
8 minutes versus almost an hour. I mean, that is literally the physical difference between life and death for a trauma patient.
Absolutely.
But I do have to ask about the economics here, because operating a fleet of autonomous aircraft seems inherently more expensive than, just paying a guy to drive a van.
The Malaysian economic evaluation addressed that directly, actually, and it requires a bit of a shift in how we calculate cost.
How so?
Well, yes, a high-tech drone costs more per minute to operate than a standard van. However, the sheer speed of the delivery completely offsets the higher operational cost. You're paying for drastically fewer minutes.
Oh, that makes sense.
Right. But more importantly, you are saving the massive costs associated with expired, wasted blood sitting in rural fridges. And, frankly, you avoid the astronomical cost of intensive care required when a patient crashes simply because they didn't get blood fast enough.
So when you look at the whole picture...
Yeah, when you factor in the reduction of waste and the reduction in ICU stays, the economics fully validate the network design.
Okay, so what does this all mean for us? If the science is flawless, the economics make sense, and Rwanda has proven the model at a national scale, achieving a 99% reduction in blood shortage mortality. Why is the developed world so far behind in adopting this? Like, if I get into a car crash in Chicago or London today, a drone isn't bringing me blood.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it reveals how legacy systems can actually become a suffocating trap.
A trap.
Yeah. The West has to painfully slowly retrofit these drones into a crowded, highly regulated airspace that was originally designed for commercial jets and helicopters. Bureaucracies like the FAA in the U.S. have incredibly strict rules about flying drones beyond visual line of sight, or BVLOS, in populated areas.
Right, because of safety concerns.
Exactly. To fly a drone over a U.S. city, you have to prove it won't hit a news helicopter, it won't drop on a school, and it can actively detect and avoid unseen obstacles.
So we are victims of our own existing infrastructure.
In many ways, yes.
But they are making moves now, right? I was looking at the source about Tampa General Hospital in Florida.
Yes, progress is definitely happening, though it requires massive legal navigation. Tampa General is partnering with an aviation company called Archer First Response to launch a 9/11-triggered whole-blood drone delivery system.
That's huge.
It is. The goal there is to bypass Tampa traffic and get blood directly to trauma scenes in under 3 minutes.
Under 3 minutes.
Yeah. This allows paramedics to begin life-saving transfusions on the side of the road before the patient is even loaded into the ambulance to head to the hospital.
And it's not just trauma either. Like, Cleveland Clinic and Baycare are also beginning to roll out prescription drone deliveries for homebound patients.
Exactly.
So we're seeing this solve civilian emergencies in Florida and Rwanda, but if these drones are so fast and efficient, what happens when the emergency is a battlefield? Because that completely changes the rules of engagement, and our sources take us to the absolute extreme edge of this technology.
It does. In Ukraine, drones are currently being used to evacuate wounded soldiers and deliver critical medical supplies directly to the front lines.
Right.
But a paper from Voices in Bioethics highlights a major modern dilemma regarding the Geneva Conventions.
Because the Geneva Conventions, which dictate the laws of armed conflict, were written decades before autonomous flying robots existed.
Exactly. The core issue outlined in the paper is the inherent versatility of a drone. Under the Geneva Conventions, medical transports are strictly protected. Like, it is a war crime to shoot down a medevac helicopter.
Sure.
But a drone is just a delivery vehicle. A quadcopter can drop a medical aid kit to a wounded soldier in a trench, but that exact same drone can just as easily drop a mortar shell.
Right. So how does international law handle that? If you're a soldier in a trench and you see a drone flying at you, you have seconds to react. You don't know if it's bringing bandages or explosives.
This raises a really important question for modern bioethics. The paper argues that for a drone to be protected under the Geneva Conventions, meaning it is legally shielded from enemy fire, it must be specifically and exclusively marked as a medical vehicle, like painting a massive red cross on it.
Okay, that makes sense.
But more importantly, its technical capabilities must be strictly limited solely to rescue and aid operations.
So absolutely no dual use.
None. For instance, if a military uses a medical drone equipped with high-resolution cameras to run reconnaissance or gather troop intelligence while it's supposedly just dropping off blood.
It loses its protected status.
Exactly. It legally becomes a tactical asset and can be rightfully destroyed by the enemy. It is a profound ethical and legal frontier we are just beginning to navigate as these networks expand.
It's just incredible how a technology that solves such a fundamental, almost ancient human problem, like getting blood to someone who is bleeding out, creates these massive, complex ripples through inventory economics, global infrastructure, and even the international laws of war.
It really forces us to rethink our basic assumptions about how complex systems should operate. We assumed ground transport was the only way to move physical goods until the ground became the primary obstacle.
Yeah. So, to synthesize all of this for you, decoupling from legacy ground infrastructure has saved thousands of lives in Rwanda. They looked at a massive infrastructural deficit, a lack of paved roads, and instead of seeing a weakness, they used it as a blank canvas.
It proved that sometimes the absolute best way to fix a broken, bloated system is to literally fly right over it.
Right. By leapfrogging the 20th century model of centralization and asphalt, they built something faster, cheaper, and vastly more effective for the 21st century. I want you to look at the systems and workflows in your own life or in your own industry. Ask yourself, are you stubbornly trying to pave a dirt road, dealing with all the traffic, the roadblocks, and the waste, when you could be building an entirely new network?
Are you tied to a legacy system just because it's what's always been done? This case study turns our standard assumptions about innovation completely on their head.
Yeah, it really does.
We instinctively expect the most advanced, frictionless solutions to come from the most developed nations. But as we see here, having a massive legacy system can sometimes be the very thing holding you back.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. If we can successfully decentralize and automate the delivery of life-saving blood, bypassing the ground entirely, what happens when we apply this exact same hub-and-spoke leapfrogging to our energy grids, or to food distribution, or even education?
That is a massive question.
Right. Will the future's most advanced resilient networks emerge not from the boardrooms of Silicon Valley, but from the places that have the least legacy infrastructure to tear down? Because sometimes, to solve the traffic jam, you just have to look up.